Okay, so we're going to try and quickly do some data analysis on our first lab. Okay, so some of this you've seen before. I'm going to try and follow the same steps that we did in the past. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to save this. Let's go with 2013-09, oops. 12, my initials, data, YouTube. Okay, so as I recall, I had trial, one card with my units, 10 card unit with grams, little g in parentheses, 20 card, little g, and finally tear, also in little g. Now they're scrunched together a little bit, so I'm going to go up to the top in between B and C, left click, and drag to spread them out a little bit. So we're good. Trial number 1, and what we did in class, what we will continue doing. For the next one down in A3, I'm going to do equals. I'm going to select the one above it and do plus 1. Enter. And I'm going to drag down as needed. Okay, I have 9 data points total, so that should do for us. All right, and so we're at a point where we can fill in our data. So, and feel free to pause to put in your data. C10. It'll take me just a moment to get all of this put in. I'm reading it the wrong way, that's okay, because I'm going to put all of these together. Those are all the correct data points. I just have them kind of recorded in a different order. Okay, and I only had 6 measurements for my 20 cards, but that'll do. And so for now, I'm going to do 0.53, which is my tear value. If you have to use some of my data to fill in afterwards, then maybe if you had to put in some of my data here instead, where it's 20 or whatever, you could mark these and then put a new tear value in, whatever the new one is, 0.26. Okay? So you can put those there, and you'll just have to adjust a little bit based on what you need. But what we're doing, you can just, wherever you would normally have this tear, you can put in whatever other one you needed. Okay, so this is my raw data. This is everything that I specifically recorded during the lab. Next, I'm going to come over here, and I'm going to start in where I can do my data analysis. I'm going to put adjusted there so that I've got a note to myself that this is where I'm starting to change my numbers. So I'm going to do 1 card, still in grams, 10 card, gram, 20 card, gram. Okay. Just like before, just so I can see things a bit clearer, I'm going to stretch these out. Okay. So for this one, I want to remove the amount that I had for tear, because I know that that's a systematic error. That's from my scale not being perfectly balanced. So I'm going to start off, I'm going to say equals, so I tell it that it's going to be doing some math for me. I'm going to select whatever's in that square, which is one of my data points, and then I'm going to do minus my tear value. Hit enter, I've got my total. Okay? So, like I did in class, we want to make certain that it's constantly using my tear value and not scaling down. So I'm going to go back in and I'm going to put $signs. And that tells it, okay, you can scale the other ones as you drag down, and it'll follow you down on these data points over here. But the one with the $signs, you stay focused on just that cell. Okay? And so if I drag this guy down, bingo, I've just fixed all of my 1 card data. Drag this over. Oops. Now I'll select these 2, and I'll drag them down using the little black square over here. Because when you grab the black square, that's what makes it take the formula in here and make it scale down. Okay, And again, I don't have data points here, here, and here. So this is just my tare negative. But that's not useful to me, so I'm going to delete that. Okay? I'm going to leave a space here just so I can see it more clearly. I'm going to write my average. Scoot that over a little bit. Okay? And like we did before, we want to get the average of all of these numbers. So I'm going to go up to my f of x here, insert a function, select that. And I'm going to type in average, and click go. And average is the one that I want. So the first thing listed here happens to be what I'm looking for. I click OK. I click my button right next to the space where I can type things in. And that lets me select which numbers. I hold down the left click and I just kind of go over all the ones that I want. Got it. Now if I wanted to average all of the numbers, I can click the button here and I can add a second set. But I don't want to do that. So instead, I'm going to delete that. Okay, cool. So I've got my average from just this column. And now, because I want the average of this column and this column, all I have to do is drag this over using the little black square. Okay? Now for some of the classes, just so we've got all of this in there, I'm going to mark standard deviation. And this one, I'm going to do that. I'm going to write standard deviation search. Okay? Well, the first one here is DSTDEV. That's their abbreviation. Estimates the standard deviation based on a sample from selected database entries. That one's a pretty good one. The one that I would recommend going for is STDEV here. Estimates standard deviation based on a sample. Ignores logical values, etc., etc. So this is the one that we actually want to go with because we're going to have it look at just one sample of data. So I'm going to select those. Click OK, and there's my standard deviation. I'm going to drag those over. Now I can see my standard deviation for all of them. Now, we're running into the problem that these numbers look kind of gross. They're really big. So let's go ahead and set this up. We're going to come back up. We might as well do it for the whole thing. I'm going to come up to the upper left here. There's a little button in between the A and the 1, just in the upper left. I click that, and I have selected every cell in my spreadsheet. I'm going to right-click, go to Format Cells. The first one here is number. Comes up on General by default. I want to go to number, and I can adjust the number of decimal places that it keeps. It comes up by default on 2, and that's a pretty good value. We'll go with that. You'll see it changes these unpleasant numbers into much better looking ones. It does not change their actual values. Excel still sees this as 0.05 with a bunch of numbers after it. But when it prints it off or shows it to me, it goes ahead and rounds it, which is good. Okay. So the next thing that I had you do in class was we're going to do the average, if I can spell it correctly, for one card, also in grams. Because in the end, we want to try and predict how much 100 cards are going to be. Okay? So for that, I've got the average for how much one card weighs. So I'm going to do equals, and I'm going to select the average for what one card weighed. I'm going to divide that by the number of cards, which is 1. And so I've got that. Next to it, because it's a slightly different number, I'm going to do equals the average for 10 cards, and I'm going to divide that by 10. That gives me the average for one of those cards out of the 10. And I'm going to do the same thing on the final one here. I'm going to set it equal to the average for 20 cards and divide that by 20. Now finally, because we've got several different values for our one card, we're going to average these so we can get a final answer. And this time, normally what you can do is you can go in and you can do the f of x and type in average. But once you use the same function a bunch of times, you may find that you get familiar with how it works. So this time I'm just going to put equals. I'm going to type in average, open parentheses, and you can see that it has number 1, 2, just like it did before. And so I put it in correctly. Excel identifies that it wants me, or I want it to take an average. So I'm going to highlight my numbers right there, close my parentheses, and bingo, that's my value. Okay? And so now I can also do predicted 100 card gram. Keep making this bigger and bigger, but that's fine. So now I'm going to do this value. Oops. Select that one. Hit equals, so it'll do the math. Select that cell. Times, which is the little asterisk above the 9 on the number pad, times 10. Or, I'm sorry, times 100. Because we're looking for 100 cards. And we're doing the same thing to each of them, so I just drag this across. And I'll drag my average down. And I end up predicting that from my data, at least in a general approach, it should weigh 116.61 grams. For the most part with significant figures. If I look back up here, I started off with 3 more or less to 2 decimal places here. I've gone through and added them up, done averages, but in here I'm actually multiplying. I'm multiplying by 100, doing dividing. So most likely I would estimate this at 117. So my end result would be probably 117 grams. That's what I would predict. Now, my actual results from measuring the 100 cards together came up to, and in fact, I might as well get some experience in drawing those. So I'm going to hit the over button down here on the bottom. Let's get some space over here. And I'll put those in. 100 cards in grams. Now I've got a lot of data points on this one. Where's my final one? There we go. I'm going to mark adjusted gram. Because remember, I measured these with the same scale that I measured the others. So I'm going to do that this one equals this, my measurement, minus, so I typed in a minus sign there, my tare value. And just like we did before, I want to keep that tare a constant, so I'm going to go in and put my dollar signs. And I drag this down. That's my adjusted. And so down here, I'm going to write in my average. This one is going to be equal to, I'm going to just type it in again because I'm familiar with it, my average of these numbers. 115.93. So I would estimate that at 116. I was off by 1 gram, which isn't bad. So I was off by about 1 card from what we've seen, maybe a little less. And I realize now that that says average instead of average. Let's go ahead and fix that. And then, just so we get some experience with it, let's find our standard deviation here. Standard deviation, parentheses. Go ahead and get those. My standard deviation there is a bit more. There was a bigger difference between my measurements on these guys. So there's a lot more fluctuation in that. Well, that's pretty good because my standard deviation says that, hey, most of the stuff fluctuates by about 1.5 grams. Well, I'm within that. So I've actually got a very good prediction of how much 100 cards would weigh. Okay.